Hello, I'm Ronald Day, Associate Vice President of the David Rothenberg Center for Public Policy, and welcome to Both Sides of the Bars, a discussion-driven show that examines the criminal justice system from various perspectives, including from those most impacted by the criminal justice system. We discuss critical questions about how the current system works, its intersections with social justice, and highlight the efforts that are being made to improve the lives of everyone that is affected by it. We ask you, the viewer, to spread the word about Both Sides of the Bars and to share your comments with us on Twitter at The Fortune Society. Today, I have two phenomenal guests with us that are going to share information with our audience about exploring the excessive use of solitary confinement. So first, Tyrell Muhammed, a formerly incarcerated person who has served 26 years in New York State Department of Corrections and Community Supervision. Mr. Muhammad's incarceration, after his incarceration, he was a founding member, or during his incarceration, he was a founding member of the Caribbean African Unity Organization, CAU. Yeah, CAU. I remember CAU. He has a master's degree from the New York Theological Seminary in 2004 while incarcerated in Sing Sing. And right now, he currently works for the Correctional Association of New York, where he works with the Prison Visiting Project, working on issues ranging from solitary confinement, mental health, and the benefits of education in prison.
Yes.
Thank you for being on Both Sides of the Bars.
Thank you for having me.
And we also have Mr. Victor Pate. Thank you, Mr. Pate, for being with us. So he's currently the chairman of the National Action Network New York City chapter Second Chance program to assist formerly incarcerated men and women as they navigate to re-enter society. He's a member of Correctional Association's Releasing Aging People in Prison Coalition and the Campaign Against Isolated Confinement. All right, he was able to earn a GED, a legal research certificate, and an associate's degree in paralegal studies, and a certificate as a legal assistant. So thank you for being with us on Both Sides of the Bars.
Thank you for having me.
So again, exploring the excessive use of solitary confinement. We know that this is an issue that has been on the radar, not just in New York City or in New York State, but around the country.
Yes.
All right, and so we always try to frame the issue for the audience just in case they're not that informed about solitary confinement. So why don't we start with you, Mr. Muhammad, and just, can you kind of like frame it, define what do we mean when we say solitary confinement? Are we saying that people are incarcerated in cells? How big are these cells? How long are they confined? So that our audience will have a much more robust understanding of how solitary confinement works on a day-to-day basis.
I usually give a description. I always try to tell the audience, your bathroom in your home.
Yes.
Imagine being in your bathroom confined there for at least 23 hours a day. And then you're there for maybe 6 weeks, 6 months, 6 years. No change of scenery. That's your existence for whatever amount of time that you've given. Most people during the winter time in the snow, and they have to be in the house 2 or 3 days, they get cabin fever. Mm-hmm. They want a change of scenery. That doesn't happen in solitary confinement. So you're there to the duration of your sentence. Mm-hmm. And it's a real brutal, lonely existence. Many people in the audience, you know, they probably believe that most people who go to solitary confinement are there for violent offenses. 5 out of 6 in New York State are there for nonviolent offenses.
In prison or in solitary confinement?
In solitary confinement.
Solitary confinement. So the misconception is that they are going to solitary confinement
for violent behavior. Most people believe that they assaulted a staff or another male counterpart inside. That's less than 1%. Yeah. Very rarely that's the case. It's really for infractions that really are minor, and they have like a good 80 infractions on the disciplinary books that can put someone in solitary confinement. One example is 106.10, disobeying the direct order. That infraction and that rule could encompass anything. You know, you have too many cigarettes, too many stamps. You smuggle too many slices of bread out of the mess hall. Though they're minor infractions, those infractions can lead you to SHU currently. as it is in New York State correctional.
So SHU being Special Housing Unit, which is solitary confinement.
Yes, solitary confinement. They have so many acronyms.
So many acronyms, right?
The SHU, SHU, Administrative Seg, Protective Custody, you know, but it's all the same. Torture, 23 hours, sometimes really 24 hours, you know, without any let up.
Got it. Thank you for that answer. Mr. Pate, let's turn over to you. How expansive is the use that we know of solitary confinement?
The use of solitary confinement is just global. In New York State alone, across the globe, it's about 80,000 people and 80,000 plus people that are held in some type of form of solitary confinement and or restrictive confinement, have you use of a better word. And in New York State alone, it's over 5,000 people that are being held in solitary confinement. And that does not even include juvenile detention facilities, immigration facilities, or military facilities. So the use of solitary confinement is wide-ranging, and depending on the geographic location, solitary confinement, it consists of all forms of isolation, and it's just extreme isolation. Solitary confinement is used for punishment and punishment only. As my colleague pointed out, a lot of times you wind up in solitary confinement for not anything major, but anything minor. And even oftentimes you can wind up in it just for your association with people in certain prison groups. And as we all know, in each society there's groups of people, so we all happen to gravitate to the type of people that may be in our group. So just for the mere fact of me knowing you and not actually having to have any direct action with you or whatever you're doing, I could wind up in solitary confinement just for my association for you. So the use of solitary confinement is wide-ranging.
Okay. And you mentioned 5,000 people in New York, which is a large number. I mean, the population is about 52,000 or so, I believe.
52,000.
So that's like 10% of the people that are incarcerated.
That's right.
Yes.
So you wanted to add something?
I wanted to add something. Yeah. It seems like in New York State, from my experience, staff at facilities utilize solitary confinement not only as punishment but as control. Many of the staff there that works at these facilities, it's a cultural difference between the population that's unfortunately housed there. And because that's the case, unfortunately, racism raises its ugly head. So an officer at Attica might not like how I walk down the hall. You know, there's no talking in the hall. I'm not talking. But he don't like how I walk down the hall. He says, you know, that's a New York City wall. Get against the wall. And then getting against the wall turns into something else, to assault. Now I'm in the box. Because the officer didn't like how I walked. So it's the overutilization of it all the time for control and punishment. You know, and what's so sad is that it's arbitrary. So I could be in one facility and get an infraction for too many cigarettes and get 60 days. Then I go to another facility with the same infraction and they'll give me 6 years.
For the same issue?
For the same incident. So it's arbitrary. There's no rule or criteria that governs each facility how they utilize solitary confinement.
Got it. And you mentioned earlier that it has been described as torture, right? We know that the United Nations has a declaration that says, I believe it's 15 days. 15 days. A minimum of 15 days is actually torture. So, like,
Juan
what do you have to
Mendez,
say about that?
The UN rapporteur, he went on a fact-finding mission during the time of Abu Ghraib.
Yes.
And when he went to Abu Ghraib, he seen all the torture that was going on, the pictures, and before the pictures came out.
Yes.
And he says this: anyone that's held in isolation that's for 23 hours and they're there over 15 days, anything over 15 days is considered torture. Recently, the UN signed on to this because there's a Mandela rule governing how people are in prison globally, internationally, how to be treated.
Sure.
The UN signed on to this. But we still, in New York, practice in violation of a UN resolution.
So we signed on the United States to this particular...
Yes, they did. They signed on to the Mandela clauses. But in New York, we're in violation of it. And in the worst way, because we hold children and women under those same criteria.
And are some jurisdictions, Victor, more egregious than others in their practice of solitary? Because it was just mentioned that there are no real guidelines. So it might not just be facilities, but cities and states might be doing the same thing in their application of solitary.
And that's the good point that you brought out. When we're talking about isolated confinement, and we're talking about placing a person in extreme isolation away from social activity, which we all know that even out here in society, you know what I'm saying, we need that interaction, that one-on-one, that communication, that ability to feel like that we have a purpose and a cause. That being placed in that circumstance, in that environment, right, has been medical studies shown that a person that is being held in isolated confinement, away from human contact, away from the ability to communicate with people, it creates and exacerbates a person's mental state of being, and it deteriorates a person's ability to communicate. It decreases a person's ability to interact with other people, and it just deteriorates a person's mental status. Now, isolated confinement on some instances, on different places, different locales, are used in different perspectives, right? And depends on where you might be at. Isolation can be either in a cell with some bars and you may have a window, right? Or it can even be in a cell that just has a steel door and a slot in order for you just to get your food. But in the same token that you are being isolated from population, your inability to communicate with another human being continues to deteriorate by each and every day. Like my colleague mentioned that 15 days is considered torture. Well, there is no particular minimum standards, minimum period of time that you can be held in isolated confinement, and you can actually be held in isolated confinement for an indefinite period of time until you're dead or almost to the point of being dead. So persons being held in solitary confinement is being considered torture. It is torturous, and people's mental health status has definitely been shown to decrease. And a person is definitely not the same when they go into solitary confinement based upon the period of time that they might be in solitary confinement.
I mean, it makes absolute sense that if you're saying a person is completely isolated for 23 hours a day over long periods of time, that could exacerbate a person's mental health. I mean, that doesn't seem to be something that we would need a significant amount of studies to support.
To know.
That's not, like, human beings are used to socializing.
Correct.
And that's what makes us human nature.
Right.
So yeah, it's like kind of, interesting that all of this is happening, with this backdrop, with us having this understanding. We don't necessarily need medical reports and studies to kind of like affirm that. But the question I have is, you also talked about the cells. So I know that some of the cells, as you said, you get your food through the slot. Some of them, don't you also like exercise inside the same cell?
Inside the cell. In Clinton Dannemora, for example, you never come out the front of your cell. You never come out the front. They have what you call a back door that electronically opens. And if it's too cold outside, too much snow, they'll allow you, it's a small 6x9 area, they'll allow you to just stand in, because you can't do much in there.
So you just stand in that area?
You stand in that area.
And that's your
recreation.
There's no equipment for you to use?
No, it's nothing. Oh, no.
Equipment.
No.
Non-existent.
You unfortunately, in that environment, you're there under your own wits. To maintain your sanity, it's a daily, moment-by-moment struggle.
Yeah, it seems, as you're saying, that would be something that you have to like force yourself to do to maintain your sanity. Yeah, and you talked about people's having their mental health exacerbated by this isolation. Are people being released right from isolation sometimes into the community? How often do we know that that is actually happening, Victor?
Yes, that is something that is happening. It's actually happening right here in New York. That people that have been in segregated confinement, in some instances for years and years on end, are released directly from solitary confinement. And I can tell you from a personal experience, you know, my few periods of time in isolated confinement, just being released from that back into the prison population is a future shock. So imagine a person being released from solitary confinement that's been in solitary confinement for 10 years. Now, mind you, during your period of isolated confinement, you're getting no meaningful programs, you're getting no meaningful mental health, you're getting no preparation for transitional services. And they open the gate and say, you're free, go home, see you later, and drop you outside of the prison walls where you get on the bus, travel whatever many miles away you might be, and all of a sudden you're in 42nd Street. The shock of itself of a person that's being released directly from solitary confinement is torture in itself. Never mind the torture that a person may have endured while they were in solitary confinement, but the mere fact that there is no preparation, there is no mental health, there is no psych evaluation to see, you know, where a person's mental status is, and then you release them directly from solitary confinement back into the streets, to me, that's a recipe for disaster.
Yeah. So
this is actually happening.
And it's happening. And you both are working in the field, so you know a lot about what's happening around solitary confinement. But there was a case that brought this to the fore for a lot of people who were very unaware, and that was the Khalif Browder case. Yes. And young man, I believe he was 17 years old, that went to Rikers Island, right, for stealing a backpack. And allegedly, and served about 2 years or so in solitary. There's video of him being assaulted
by staff as well as men.
Other men that are inside. And he ended up coming home and tried to get his life together.
Right.
And unfortunately, he committed suicide. And so you mentioned a second ago, people are not being released with the type of mental health treatment. Do we know of other, we know that this is not an anomaly where this is happening on a large scale. People are just not getting the treatment that they need as they transition from these facilities. What do you say to that particular issue? Like, what should we be doing as a society?
That's a public safety and a public health issue, particularly in the communities where we come from. You know, when we return, you know, I always ask the question, how would you like for me to return?
Yes.
And then when I see brothers come home and their mental state done, you know, debilitated, they don't get the proper intake so they can know whether they need therapy or medication or anything. See, that falls on the state.
Yes.
Because to give you $40 in a bus ticket and say good luck, knowing you set up to fail. Because I've been traumatized. I don't know how it's going to play out. I don't know how it's going to manifest itself. But once I get out there, now I got anxiety attacks. I don't know where to go. Now I'm self-doubting myself. I don't want to go to a therapist or psychiatrist because I don't want no one to think I'm crazy. See, all of these things come into play. And then what happens is we further and further push ourselves away from the help because of the stigma. And then what happens? We usually get another charge, or we really lose our mind to the point where we are incapable of recognizing our family members. And I've met men like that. You know, and I see them, and it really, this is why I do this. Because I see the damage that was done to sane men. And it shouldn't have been happening. It happened to me. You know, when I came home, I was so messed up, I couldn't walk down a New York City block by myself. And there was no one physically stopping me. But it was a psychological barrier that prevented me from fully walking a city block because I was so used to being confined and escorted everywhere for being in the box. So when that was gone, I still was operating off of that premise.
Exactly. Yeah.
But no one told me that was going to happen.
Yeah. And thank you for sharing that personal story.
No problem.
And Victor, so we know that, again, Khalif Browder and other stories have brought this to the attention of some of our policymakers. I know that there was an issue with young adults on Rikers Island, and there was a report by the Attorney General's office about the systemic abuse that happened against them, that was perpetuated against them. And so these cases has caused President Obama to come up with an initiative. Is that an initiative that you think is going to be effective at reducing the likelihood of people serving time in solitary confinement?
In one answer, no. It's only a beginning. And what he did affected the federal system and affects the federal system. It does nothing for the state system in itself. I applaud him for him standing up, stepping up, making this decision, you know what I'm saying? But it's not enough. It is, to me, it's only a beginning of what needs to be done, but him as a president taking a stand the way that he did and to actually come out and say this here, it's the initial beginning of what needs to be done across the board, everywhere, not just in the federal system. And as far as that is concerned, see, sometimes people are misunderstanding that they think that when a decision is made, such as what he just did, that all of a sudden it's going away, it's going to be fixed. There's no quick fix to this. It's only a beginning of process, because if you have a systemic situation that's been in place for years and years and years and years, then it's going to take years and years and years and years to get it fixed. So it's only the beginning of the process that should have been done.
And we know that it took us years to get into this situation.
No question.
And it's not going to be like just one day and then it's all going to be wiped out. So President Obama's policy only applies to juveniles, as I understand it.
To juveniles, and I just wanted to hit on something. See, it step in the right direction, but it's very misleading because in the federal system, there's only I think it's 28 juveniles in the federal system. The rest are in detention centers. So when you say that you barred it from juveniles from going in there, those 28 probably not even in there. So it's very misleading because you come out, see, that's why I said you can't play politics with our lives. This is our lives. And then once you denigrate our lives to politics, you're really not concerned about the real issue. The lives of human beings being destroyed. Of course, they had a problematic behavior that caused them to go to prison, but that shouldn't be the end all. That should be the beginning, as we say, of the transformation.
And New York State recently settled a lawsuit, right, around their use of solitary confinement. All right, is that something you could speak to, Victor?
Sure. Well, with New York Civil Liberties Union, right, came to agreement with the New York State Department of Corrections and Community Supervision that they would decrease the population, certain populations that are in long-term solitary confinement, because as you know, they have people that there is no particular time that you can be held in solitary confinement, and you can be in there from 1 day to 100 days till centuries on. So there was a class action suit that was settled between NYCLU and Department of Corrections and Community Supervision that basically said that they will begin, here we go again, see, all of this stuff is that people think that these decisions and these class action decisions that are being made means that overnight, all of a sudden, solitary confinement is going to be done away with. Everybody that's in solitary confinement is going to be let out, and it's going to be a whole new change in the solitary confinement circumstances, which in actuality, that's not the case. So I think the numbers was, I think it was supposed to have been 1,100 people that were supposed to have been immediately eligible to be let out of solitary confinement. Now, what happened is that they actually gave them a window period of 5 years to phase in this change. So what happens within the next 5 years, it does not mean that this is going to happen, because one, somebody has to be watching. Somebody has to have checks and balances to make sure that the decisions and the agreements that were made will actually be followed, and the people that this is supposed to affect will actually begin the process to actually phase them out. Now, here's the other part of that. So what about people that have been in solitary confinement for a long time? What's the process? How is that going to be phased in? What mental health services are going to be provided to the people that have been in there long term? That you just can't all of a sudden say, okay, we're going to let you out and put you in population if you're still serving your time.
In the couple of minutes that we have left, why don't you just tell us quickly about the campaign that you're involved in and how people can get involved?
Okay, we're part of a campaign called the Campaign Against Isolation and Confinement. The acronym is CAKE. And the campaign, what we do is it's nationwide as well as statewide. We have chapters upstate, Buffalo, Ithaca, near Syracuse, Jersey, out there in Princeton. And we highlight the abuse that takes place in solitary confinement. We have a direct action once a month on the 23rd. We do it on the 23rd in solidarity with those that's in keep lock or solitary confinement for 23 hours. And we usually go to a community that's really impacted by criminal justice. So we'll go in the Bronx or Edomore projects. And we'll come out with our place cards and our bullhorn. And we're just informing the community about solitary confinement and what it does and how we need to get rid of it. Because most of the communities we come from really are not familiar with what goes on inside.
All right, well, thank you both for being on the show. I mean, we've come to the conclusion, but this is a conversation that we can have for another couple of hours.
Yes.
We can continue. So thank you, Mr. Muhammad. Thank you, Mr. Pate, for being on the show.
Ronald.
All right. Thank you, Victor Pate and Tyrell Muhammed, for joining us on both sides of the bars today. And thank you in TV land for joining us as well. If you're interested in finding out more about the Fortune Society, please check us out on the web at fortunesociety.org or on Facebook by typing in the Fortune Society. This is Ronald Day as we critically look at both sides of the bars.